This video opens immediately where the last one left off, with the death of Barilla Baggins née Boffin. This, I think, had long-reaching ramifications for the way her family lived their life, because Barilla had position. She's an old woman by this time, and it makes sense to me that her death would have fragmented the family a little further. She had a kind of special place in the Boffin household as the oldest generation of Boffins still to live there. She'd likely been born in that house. She'd never lived anywhere else. That was the way things were in that century in the Shire, and in all the previous centuries too. Just as that's the way things were in England, at least up till the 18th century. Barilla's death would have changed a great deal socially. Balbo is still there, but Balbo is a male hobbit. If there was a female hobbit in the house, she was the one who ran it. That was Tolkien's world. Balbo was not in charge of the property in general. That was Otto. Balbo is sitting back, living a quiet retirement now, but Barilla was still the senior person in the house. It's from this era that all those stories of troublesome mother-in-laws began. There's inevitably going to be a power struggle between the one who has lived there the longest, who was born and raised in the house, and the incoming wife of the son who has inherited everything. Barilla and Lavender no doubt got on very well, but she would have had her traditions. She would have had her older customs that it would have been very hard for Lavender to break. Things done the way they always were done. Things done the way Otto's mother used to do it. Things done the way Otto's grandmother used to do it. Barilla knew all that, so Barilla would have held some influence in the property. As she grew older, there's a fair chance that everybody gave in to that more than ever, knowing that she didn't have many years left. Here we get to this time when she has passed away. She will be sorely missed. But this will also be a time of renewal for the Boffin house. Following almost immediately on from Barilla's death, we get the release of Lily Baggins from her former duties. I talked before about the responsibilities of the eldest son. Similarly, in England, there were responsibilities for the youngest daughter. The youngest daughter very often became the nursemaid for elderly parents, elderly grandparents, elderly aunts and uncles, as well as the prime assistant for sisters and sister-in-laws who were having babies. Lily Baggins was probably a very busy young woman. Her caring duties would have been relentless, especially in Barilla's final year of life. No doubt she's looking after Barilla, she's looking after Balbo, she's looking after Lavender's children as required, and probably travelling off across the country to look after any others of her nieces and nephews if there was sickness in that family. With the death of Barilla, she is released. There's not so many ties to hold her there looking after her cousin Otto and his wife and their children. With the death of Barilla, Balbo to some extent is freed too. He's a very old man, but he's not a Boffin. Otto and Lavender are probably very happy for him to stay there to the end of their days, but they don't have the responsibility for his care that his own children do. Here's Lily Baggins. She's 40 years old. She's still a young woman, but she's moving past the flush of early adulthood. This was a problem that many single daughters faced in England if they had elderly parents to look after. They couldn't meet somebody and settle down. They were effectively held captive by their family. As an example, this was the primary tension of Jane Austen's book Emma. Emma had everything going for her. She had wealth, she had beauty, she had confidence. It should have been very easy for her to get married. But she had that major conflict that she couldn't leave her ageing father, and her father loved his house with its memories of his wife and his past. Everything that was dear to him was in that property. Were she to marry somebody else, she would have to go and live with her husband in his house, because that was the way things were done. Even if he agreed to take her ageing father there too, so she could continue to care for her father in her new home, in her married home, She knew it would kill him to leave all that he held dear behind him. Her father was his own kind of tyrant, but she knew that his care was her responsibility, and she couldn't expect a gentleman to take her father on if he chose to marry her. For some reason, that aspect of that book is rarely discussed in reviews, but that was her principal concern, even to the end. Even when Emma and Mr. Knightley were getting on so well, she knew she loved him and he proposed to her, she still said no because she couldn't leave her father, because it was her duty to look after her father. That was so deeply ingrained in her that she could not put her own desires over that duty, over her obligations and her responsibilities, which in Regency and Victorian England was considered a primary virtue of the aristocracy, that their self-respect was tied up with their sense of duty. What we see in Emma, we're seeing here to a smaller extent in Lily Baggins. Lily probably doesn't have the same conflict as Austen's Emma Woodhouse, but she certainly has that same responsibility to her father. I think that was where Lily found herself. She was most likely very willing to be in that position, but it's a tough place to be. Looking at Pansy and how her marriage must have turned out, Lily might have wondered what there was ahead of her. My guess is that Barilla Baggins, née Boffin, died early in 1262, and by the end of 1262, Lily was married. Lily married Togo Goodbody. We're not given any details about Togo, and we're not given any details about any children they might have had, just that various Goodbodies descended from the pair. We don't have a tree for the Goodbodies, but the name does pop up on various occasions. I don't think it's coincidence that Fastolf's mother was Cora Goodbody. So we do have a Goodbody link there. What I think happened is that after Barilla's death early in 1262, Lily and Balbo both went to stay with Pansy, because they didn't have such a hold on the Boffin household anymore. It was not their family home, it was Barilla's family home, and with her deceased, they've moved on. There was probably some thought that Pansy would take over the care of Balbo, or maybe simply that Fastolf and Pansy had the bigger house, and Balbo being Pansy's father, they could play host to the pair. They could integrate the two of them into the Bolger household in general. My further guess would be that while they were living with Fastolf and Pansy, there were various other relatives of Fastolf who came to visit, including cousins on his mother's side, on the Goodbody side. I would be guessing that Togo Goodbody is either Fastolf's first or second cousin. My thought is that Lily Baggins, having moved into the bigger household with Fastolf and Pansy, has met Togo. The two of them have got on really well, and this has resulted in their marriage at the end of 1262. As for Balbo, he would have lived with one of his daughters. Maybe they worked it out among them who was going to have him. Maybe he flitted between the two households. I'm not really sure, but I would say at this point the Bagginses have left the Boffin household. The Boffins are coming up in the world. Otto is no doubt upgrading and expanding and refencing and refurbishing the house and strengthening the walls and all the things you do. That house is getting a little bit grand now. No longer looks like a tired country house. It's becoming something quite dignified. But the only occupants now are Otto and Lavender, their 3 sons and 1 daughter. There's something I'd like to clarify. I said in a former video that Mungo had responsibility for his ageing parents. And now I'm saying that Lily does. So I'd like to clarify that Mungo's responsibility was financial responsibility. He was the one who needed to provide for his ageing parents. He was not, as a man in a patriarchal society, expected to give up his own life to provide that care personally. If Balbo found himself homeless, it was Mungo who needed to provide him with a home. He didn't have to do this by bringing him into his own home, unless he wished. He could do this by renting a little cottage somewhere for Balbo, or by putting the word out among his extended family to see if somebody had a room for him to stay. He just had that overarching responsibility to just check in every so often and make sure that Balbo had food and clothing and that his debts were being paid on time and all of that sort of stuff. If anybody had a gripe about Balbo, if Balbo had made promises that he wasn't able to keep, that person would bring their complaint to Mungo as the son in charge. Lily, on the other hand, is the youngest daughter, so she is expected to actually do the daily tasks, to cook the food, help him bathe, change his bedding, go out and get those clothes that Mungo needs to pay for. All of those things. That is the breakdown of labour. The way I expressed it before was a bit confusing, but that is what we are seeing here. It is Mungo who will notice that Balbo doesn't have a home, who will write a letter to his sisters, Pansy and Lily, and say which one of you is going to have them. Now, he probably didn't need to go to those lengths because everybody understood the system. So right from when Balbo and Barilla were beginning to age, that discussion would have been had. Pansy and Lily would have known, even as young children, that at some point that was the duty one of them was taking on. And they would have known that primarily the daily care would be Lily's job. But it's quite reasonable that Balbo would go and live with Pansy because Pansy and Fastolf have a big enough house, whereas Mungo, I still think, is simply living in lodgings, if I could call them that, in Great Smiles. He doesn't have the ability to tack on another room in his dwelling. It's not his own. He can't put a little cottage in his backyard because he doesn't have a backyard. He is living in the greater underground burrows that belongs to the Tooks. All of this is why I think Lily and Balbo would have moved out of the Boffin house and ended up living with Fastolf and Pansy. They all knew it was coming. I would say as Barilla grew older and weaker, they'd had this discussion. They'd asked, what will happen to Balbo when Barilla dies? And even if Otto and Lavender are completely happy for him to be there, is it the ethical thing to do? To effectively be dumping your elderly parent on people who are not responsible for their care, especially when you have the room yourself to keep them there. It was undoubtedly a very smooth transition, and the result is that after Barilla's death, when everything has settled down, Balbo and Lily have packed up their things and moved into the Bolger household. At the same time, I would say that Largo has moved out of the Boffin house too. There's really nothing there for him if the rest of his family is gone. My guess is that at this time, Largo moved over to Brandy Hall. Brandy Hall is a very large burrow as well. It would have room for him, and I do see him as being a particular friend of Marmaduke's. I don't think Ponto has room for Largo, so he wouldn't have gone there, and I don't see him setting up his own household. So that's what I think happened. Barilla has passed away. Balbo and Lily have moved over to Pansy and Fastolf. Largo has gone over to Marmaduke and Adeldreda at Brandy Hall. And so we have Lily in the right place to meet Togo Goodbody. Not only that, but Balbo can safely be left in the care of Pansy, which actually frees Lily up to be married. I have no idea where the Goodbodies live. I don't even know which farthing they come from. I'm sort of imagining they come from the East Farthing, north of the water, kind of moving towards Hobbiton, but not there yet. That, to me, fits with the movements of the other hobbits later on. So that establishes Balbo in a new home and Lily in her new home and her new life, which leaves us with Largo. Here he is, our dreamy artist. In 1262, he's 42 years old, and since we're at the end of 1262, he's about to turn 43. He's by no means old, and he doesn't have that responsibility to get married that his eldest brother did. Both his elder brothers are married, so he's not required to produce a next generation to look after the elder people of the family. I'd say at this point he feels like life has moved on without him. He's the only one who's still single. He's gone to Brandy Hall. I am pretty sure he's over that way somewhere. But Marmaduke is now married. Marmaduke and Adeldreda are in the middle of producing 4 children. They're very much preoccupied with each other and their growing family. And as well as that, things are getting a little bit tighter in Buckland. Not that anybody would know unless you were included in the personal private conversations of the Master of Buckland. But Maddox is getting quite old. He's 87 now. He must be starting to slow down. He must be relying more and more on Marmaduke. So Marmaduke is likely experiencing a bit of tension, assisting his father to run Buckland and also no doubt assessing his father's methods. Maddox, I said before, I see as a very stoic man. I would say he was a very cautious man. He was quiet, he was thorough, he was insular. He's been very prudent, but he has quite possibly been over-reliant on traditional ways. I don't see him as creative. I do see Marmaduke as being more creative than his father, through spending more time with Gerontius Took or through the influence of Gandalf, who I still see as visiting the Shire fairly regularly in this time period. Also through associating with the Bolgers and the Boffins and even with the Bagginses. In my last video, I saw the Bagginses teaching Marmaduke a whole lot of working class ways. Marmaduke is the first one of all the aristocratic families to grow up face to face with the values of the working class in the Shire. The Baggins children, I believe, taught Marmaduke a great deal about crops and gardening, the vagaries of the weather, how to make a small amount of food go a long way, how to mend clothes so that you can't see where the mend is, even just the pleasures of sitting out of doors on your veranda watching the sunset in the evening, instead of spending your evenings inside, eating and drinking and burning candle wax that you don't really need to burn. It's subtle changes like that that Marmaduke can bring to his management of Brandy Hall down the track when he takes it over for good. The Masters of Buckland were all given this name, this cognomen that they carried. It was probably 2 videos ago that I talked about this, how Gormaduke was known as Deep Delver, which I saw as suggesting he'd focused inward on the Hall and on defence after all the difficult events of the early 1100s. Maddox was Proudneck. If he was stoic and somewhat traditional, as I think he was, I see that as a fitting name as well. Marmaduke, in his turn, and he's not there yet, but he's getting there, becomes known as Masterful. And I think that's because he's been exposed to a variety of new concepts regarding management. From the Bolgers, from the Boffins, from the Bagginses. Being an intelligent and skillful man himself, with a great deal of natural leadership, I suspect, he's able to take all that on board as he begins to take over the control of Buckland in a time where future troubles are just beginning to show themselves on the horizon. I've said all that to explain the atmosphere that I think was in Brandy Hall at that time. Marmaduke dealing very competently with a huge number of responsibilities, and not just doing the work, but making his own assessments, looking ahead, thinking about potential changes, pulling everything together, all of which leaves him very little time to indulge in the bachelor life with his friend Largo. So, what's Largo going to do? He's the only unmarried one in his family now, as 1262 moved into 1263. Marmaduke and Edeldreda at this point only have the one child, but the next is going to arrive fairly soon. Largo sees how things are going to be at Buckland. He sees that he needs to find his own niche, that his niche isn't there. With Barilla now deceased and Balbo moved from the Boffin household, it has probably slapped Largo right in the face that he is actually homeless, that he needs to put down roots somehow, that he needs to find a niche for himself in the world. He's in a very difficult position. He is, in effect, an aristocrat born into a working class family. He has imbibed all those values, all those lifestyle privileges growing up, but he's not actually one of them. He's on the cusp with the marriages of Pansy and Lily, and also the marriage of Mungo. He's associating with all the right people. But he's homeless and he's potentially without skills. He probably doesn't want to go and work on somebody's farm. Everyone in the family would give him a home, would give him a job. Otto would have him. He could go there and manage the land, the way Balbo probably did in a previous generation. He could do the same for Fastolf or for Togo Goodbody. But who wants to leech off their brother-in-law? That doesn't change anything. It's a very temporary measure. One of the big differences between the working class and the aristocrats in England and in the Shire was that the aristocrats had the freedom to look to the future. They had the ability to plan their life, to have a sense of progress, to imagine that things are going to be different for them in 50 years' time to how they are now. It was an upward trajectory in their own life, in their interests, in their skills, in their wealth, in their prestige. Largo, I'm pretty sure, is doing that now. He's looking ahead. He knows what he would like to have. He knows where he would like to be. He cannot do it. He's working class. Working class people, in 50 years' time, they'll be doing exactly the same thing as they're doing now. If they don't own a house now, they're not going to own a house in 50 years' time. Or if you're a hobbit with a long life, in 80 years' time, 90 years' time, it's not going to make any difference. You are who you are. You're going to live in a little 1 or 2 bedroom cottage all your life that's owned by your employer. You're going to do your job, and when you're too old to do your job, if you're lucky you've got an unmarried daughter to ease your final days, what most people have is a married daughter who will do the same. That is technically what's in front of Largo, and that is what Ponto has settled for. But Largo doesn't want that. It's not that he repudiates it. It's not that he sees that as anything lesser. It just isn't how he wants to spend his own life. So he's in a very tough spot. And I would imagine he doesn't want anybody to know it. I don't actually know what Largo did between 1262 and 1264. It's possible that he travelled. I don't think he travelled far, if so. He may have gone to Bree for a while. There were some Boffin relatives in Bree. But I think by 1263 he'd made his way to the South Farthing, and that is where he met Tanta Hornblower. Now I'm going to stray into another of my little stories. Last video, I made up a story about how the 7 Hobbit children grew up. That story was the fitting together of a whole lot of facts that don't easily reconcile. And as I said then, there were other ways it could play out, but that was the way I saw as the most logical. I'm going to do that again here, with the meeting of Largo and Tanta and their future together. I can't know if this is true. Tolkien gives us very few details to work on, even fewer details than we get from other people. But the few things we do know about Largo and his future need to fit together in some way, and this is how I think it played out. This is my hypothesis. I'm going to go ahead and tell this little story that I've fabricated. There are other ways it could play out, but in order to do this video series, I need to settle on something to explain the things that come later. This is my suggestion of the sequence of events at this time. And with that, I'll go into them. Largo grew up with big dreams. I don't think he even realised it until he was an adult. That's fair enough. But because he didn't realise it, and because nobody had any expectations of him other than that he would live an utterly obscure life, he wasn't trained in any way to follow his dreams. Mungo and Largo are probably very similar in that way. They've got skills, they've got intelligence, they've got the capacity to be much more than people expected. Mungo got lucky there because Mungo was a protege of Gerontius Took. Because Gerontius spent so much time with Mungo, Gerontius did what was needed so that Mungo could fulfil his potential. I believe Gerontius apprenticed Mungo to a lawyer, to Laura Grubb's father. That's what it takes. He had the ability, he had the training, he had the job, he had the place to live. He could then marry into the world that he was now equipped to live in, and he was set. Mungo was the eldest child, so it made sense for Gerontius to do that for him if he saw that he had the skills. Largo, on the other hand, has been completely overlooked. He was a friend of Marmadoc's, but Marmadoc is the same age as him, and Marmadoc, being a child when Largo was a child, wasn't as aware of the differences in their life expectations as Gerontius was. The Shire doesn't have anything like schools or universities. If you don't have somebody physically there who can actually train you up into a profession, there's no way you can join that profession. There's no way you can learn it on your own. So I think in this time period, 1262, 1263, Largo is wandering around trying to figure out how he can become the person he wants to be, how he can use the skills that he knows he has when he has effectively no sponsor. As well as that, he needs to figure out what he can do, what kind of compromise he can achieve. He won't be able to do what Pansy did, probably what Lily has done as well, and marry somebody who can support him in the lifestyle that he would like. That doesn't happen to men in the Shire. It is the man who has to provide. It is the man who sets the class. If Largo was to marry, for instance, Edeldrada Bolger, she would instantly drop in status. He wouldn't easily be raised up to hers. It can happen, and it does happen later on in the Shire when the classes get a little more fluid than they are now. But at this point, that's not going to happen to Largo. He doesn't quite have the skills to pull that off anyway. There's no way he's going to get trained up to be a lawyer like Mungo, and he's 43 years old now. Mature age students aren't a thing in the Shire. By his age, his profession ought to be set in stone. He ought to have pretty much completed his training. He ought to be well established in whatever career he's going to have. Which only leaves the labouring work, the farm labouring work. He clearly doesn't want to do that. It would be a terrible waste of his skills if he did. He would probably never be able to show his face in society again. If he spends all day earning a pittance working on somebody's farm, how could he go and have an evening meal, for instance, with Pansy and Falstaff Bolger, or with Marmaduke and Edeldrada? Given that I think this is his situation now, he has wandered south. He's gone into the South Farthing. He's looking for that halfway point between unskilled labour and aristocrat. He's probably thought about Mungo and how he's become a lawyer. That probably looks like a pretty good life to him, but it's too late. He can't do that. He probably isn't suited to that anyway. So when he's wandering through the South Farthing, he comes across the Hornblowers. The Shire is pre-industrial. The labour is entirely done by people. They do have simple ploughs in the Shire. They do have pony-drawn carts at times. But harvesting was done by hand, carrying was done by hand, sorting through crops was done by hand. A large-scale operation involves a large number of workers, and that means a large number of buildings. You don't only need buildings to store the finished product and to store the equipment you're using. You need massive amounts of housing for your workers, and if they've got a job which can be done indoors, you need a big enough area for those workers to do their job even in the rain. It would have been an impressive place for Largo to come across, because nowhere else in the Shire had anything like this. As we know from the books, the Hornblowers grew and sold pipeweed. That was one of the major industries for the Shire, one of the only industries that it had. It was a very successful enterprise. As I've said before, there was no money in the Shire. The money that the Shire had came in from outside. Some of it was then distributed within the Shire as it was passed down from the wealthy to the workers, but money didn't play a big part at all, really. You could employ labourers and not pay them if you provided them with housing and food and anything else that they might need. There were markets and people could trade at the markets. If you grew plums, you could trade them for somebody else's carrots. You didn't really need coin. Coin was there. In the Fellowship of the Ring, the hobbits had no difficulty understanding that they needed coin to purchase Bill the Pony and Bree. And there are references to coin bags and coins in The Hobbit, because the dwarves regularly used coin as currency. In the Shire, where everybody has grown up with each other, they're all practically one big family, and in many cases, they are all actually one big family. You could probably get through half your life without really needing it. That's something I think it's worth making clear when I talk about Largo and his future. He's come to the Hornblowers, he's come to a wealthy operation, he's come to a merchant operation, but it's not an industry conducted the way we imagine a large enterprise to be conducted today. It's work-based, it's orders-based, it's based on supply and demand. And even though they have accumulated a reasonable amount of profit through providing a product that many, many people want and continue to want through the decades, profit isn't necessarily their objective. If you live in a world where money is not important, where you can actually get by without having money, then what does profit really mean? Money ends up being something that you just put in your back cupboard. It's probably nice to have, and maybe someday you will need it, but you don't necessarily need it now. Running a successful business in an environment like that is more about diligence and service provision, pride in your product, pride in your family, and pride in your craft. Because it was a craft. Growing pipeweed was a craft. The Hornblowers were not the only family who did it. There was a little bit of healthy competition between them all, and there was professional interest among them all to see how each other was doing it. I'd say it wasn't cutthroat. It was all very friendly. But among that friendliness, there is a desire to keep improving, and I would say the Hornblowers are fairly obsessive about their product. They're very pedantic, very particular in how they do it, because that's what they take pride in. The Hornblowers are a very large family. By the 1260s in the Shire, they must have a whole lot of second cousin, third cousin branches who are still attached to the business because that's what they've grown up in, and that's what the Hornblowers are known as. The pipeweed is actually grown in the South Farthing. They've been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. They've set up all of their buildings. They've set up their warehouses and their sorting houses and their packing houses and their stock buildings. Everything is in order. But a lot of their customers are not in the South Farthing. What I think they've done, they've got their large-scale export operation, which takes pipeweed out of the Shire. How do they service their customers in the other farthings? It's too far for those people to come and get it. The Shire does have some kind of a mail service, but it's a very haphazard thing. There's no certainty that a letter or a parcel will get where it's going at all. Most people seem to send letters via their families and friends. I think pipeweed was distributed through the Shire, through little shops in the little villages. That's what I think Largo did for the rest of his life. I think he became a shopkeeper. What is a shop in the Shire? We're in a pre-industrial society where coin doesn't mean much at all. A shop is likely to be either in the front room of somebody's house or a stall in somebody's front yard, or if it is its own dedicated building, it's going to be erected probably by the street. Most trade is still done through markets. Pipeweed was probably sold at markets too. But since Tolkien has based the Shire very much on that era of Europe, little shops did exist. They've existed for hundreds, for thousands of years by that time. I think that dotted around the Shire, there probably were little shops selling a variety of goods that also happened to sell pipeweed. The Shire wouldn't really know what to do with these shops. They wouldn't know how to think about them. Shops, by their very nature, seem to run counter to all the values that are prized in the Shire, to all the values that used to be prized in pastoral England and other countries. The idea of profit for profit's sake, that was barely comprehensible, and if not outright evil, it was at least very rude. To profit from somebody's loss was alien to the way anybody thought in this area. I expect the process was better understood in the South Farthing because they had had shops and trade for some time. Each farthing seems to have had its own characteristics. The Hobbits didn't move around much. You could live your whole life and never leave your own farthing, which meant that family groups tended to stay in their own farthing, which meant that local customs tended to develop in their own farthing, and that created a very local flavour. The East Farthing was, for some reason, the most traditional, the most quiet, the most old-fashioned part of the Shire, where the old families sat on the same properties and not much changed at all. I would say that If you left the East Farthing like I think Largo did and travelled to the South Farthing, you're going to find yourself in what seems like an alien culture. That's exactly what Largo was looking for, because he was already an alien in his own world. Here he is now in the South Farthing. He's come to the large Hornblower holdings, and he can see that maybe this is a way for him to live respectably and use the skills that he has. The skills that other people don't have, like being able to read and write and understand geography and understand abstract concepts like profit. They're all going to understand that he doesn't know this stuff, that at the age of 43 he needs to be trained up, because they recognise that this is a South Farthing thing, the other Farthings don't have it. Because they're running a commercial enterprise, they're dealing with strangers quite a bit already, so they're a little bit more accepting of somebody who comes in from elsewhere, especially since he seems to have skills that they can use. This is what I think Largo did. He found himself among the Hornblowers. He was probably forced to take a general labouring job at first. They learned that he could read and write and think. They brought him into one of their shops. He would definitely see it as preferable to labouring in the fields. And it does have more of a respectability factor, so he can still show his face among the other members of his family who probably weren't going to look down on him, but I think he wanted better for himself, so he feels better about himself doing this. I would imagine this is where he met Tanta Hornblower. I'd say that she was running a shop. I don't think she's one of the main family, because there'd be more about her in the tree if she was. She's a second or third or fourth cousin branch to the principal business owners. Because that's the way it works in the Shire, they'll bring in everybody. It's a family operation and you need all the people you can get. So here's Tanta, a member of a minor branch of the Hornblower family, working in a shop in the South Farthing selling pipeweed. Probably not only selling pipeweed, but selling other things as well. But, pipeweed is the thing that draws the customers in. And she also is dreaming of better things. She wants more in her future. I would imagine that she's probably the same age as Largo. She may even be a few years older. Tolkien doesn't give us any clues about her age. Here's Largo. He's an attractive man. He's a charismatic man. He's a dreamer. He is a listener. He's come in from the East Farthing. He's educated. And further to that, he's very well connected. He can talk about growing up with Marmaduke Brandybuck, about knowing Gerontius Took personally, about being related to the Bulgars. To Tanta, he probably seemed positively miraculous. In our modern world, we recognise that people like that are too good to be true. We're wary of them. In the Shire, that rarely happened. I'm not suggesting that Largo misrepresented himself in any way, but he was an anomaly. In the ordered world of the Shire, people like him just did not exist. You didn't get misfits because people were comfortably inside their own class, people were comfortably inside their own worlds. Anybody who presented themselves like him, who thought the way he thought, the way the aristocrats thought, had to be an aristocrat, because otherwise the true aristocrats of the region would put you straight in your place. You didn't get away with that kind of thing. It was deemed to be fraudulent. Largo clearly wasn't fraudulent because he personally knew Marmaduke and Gerontius, and chances are he received letters or some conversation with one of those made it clear that they really did know Largo and knew that he was in the South Farthing at that time. There was nothing duplicitous here, but I think, my headcanon is anyway, that through sheer accident, Largo seemed to be someone he wasn't. Not in his dealings, not in his employment, not in the way he presented himself, but he accidentally tricked Tanta. I do think they had a lot in common. I do think they were getting on quite well. What I think happened was Largo came into her world full of energy, full of enthusiasm for the world of commerce, as the Shire knew it. He wanted to learn how to run a shop. He wanted to sell things. He wanted to know all the ins and outs of the business. And that business was Tanta's world. That business was the world of the village of Longbottom. A man who was that enthusiastic about business was exactly what every woman there wanted, because they understood that that was the personality, that was the kind of drive you needed to make a success of an operation like the selling of pipeweed. Tanta didn't know him well enough to know what was behind Largo's enthusiasm. It wasn't the business itself. It wasn't actually buying and selling and providing a sterling service to their customers and the improvement of pipeweed. It wasn't any of that. It was the excitement of maybe finding a place where he could fit in and be of some use. Largo was a very good person. I'm quite sure of that. So here's Tanta. She's a competent woman who, for some reason, hasn't yet gotten married. In the Shire, family is paramount. In the Shire, family is truly a comfort and a support. She probably did want to get married. I think this is very likely because, firstly, she's not married yet. And secondly, we know she marries somebody from outside of her own farthing, and that is unusual at this time in the Shire. That would not have been a first choice for any Hobbit woman. When you marry somebody from out of the Shire, you go off to their home, generally, because they're the ones that make the money. That means you are taking yourself away from all the support you possibly could have, from those unmarried sisters that might come and look after you when your children are babies, from that mother that you would normally go to for advice about all kinds of household matters. She's allowing herself to leave all that when she marries Largo. So she has to have been in some kind of constrained situation to make that the best choice, no matter how charming Largo is. Tanta saw little chance for marriage in her future, little chance for doing anything other than working in the shop where she was working for her distant relatives, and Largo came in like a breath of fresh air. On Largo's side, I think he really wanted to make a go of his future. He really wanted to be as successful as Mungo. He really wanted to go back and probably resume his friendship with Marmaduke in the way it had once been. Marrying Tanta allied him with his own important family, and by marrying Tanta he married her shop, which gave him that career for life that he wanted. If Largo was the dreamer that I think he was, if he was the creative soul that I think he was, he would have looked at Tanta's shop and thought how he could improve it. He would have imagined how they could take that business into the East Farthing, where there currently was no pipeweed shop, and build it up into something truly massive, something important, something to be proud of in the way the Hornblowers were proud of their own business. I'm guessing this is what Largo and Tanta thought when they got married. That was how they saw their futures. Neither of them were doing terribly well as single people, but together they could pull out of that rut and actually achieve. And so in 1263, Largo and Tanta were married. I'm pretty sure they did not immediately return to the East Farthing. I think, although it was Largo's idea that they would return to the East Farthing, it wasn't Tanta's. I think Tanta convinced Largo that they needed to save up, they needed to build up the business in the South Farthing before they returned home. Largo would have seen the sense in this. So they settled down there where there were other hornblowers around, where Largo could learn much more about the business than he already knew. I would assume he felt that he was on top of it already, but Tanta would have known that there's a whole lot to business that he didn't know, that he wasn't thinking clearly about it yet. So the next few years they stay in the South Farthing. This is where their one and only child Fosco is born in 1264. They're running their little shop. They're making ends meet. They're probably putting a bit aside because they're saving up for the big move to the East Farthing that Largo really wants to do and Tanta really doesn't want to do. And I think that after 3 or 4 years, things begin to sour between them. They don't have any more children. Fosco is the only one they have, which doesn't really mean anything. There's other hobbits that only have one child. But clearly hobbits can have large families, so why didn't they? I think life was tough. I think they had a lot of work to do. I think it took a lot to run the shop. And I also think that Largo wasn't very good at it. To run a successful business, you have to keep your eye on profits. You have to keep your eye on your overheads. You have to keep your eye on repairs and customers and service and presentation. You have to be very practical. And Largo wasn't. If he was a practical person, he wouldn't have ended up in the position he was. Ponto grew up exactly the same way as Largo, and Ponto was more practical, which is why he realised he was never going to be able to live the life of Marmaduke. Ponto realised early, found himself a compatible wife, and settled in straight away with a farm of his own, knowing that his future was going to involve hard work, and that was the best way to tackle it. But Largo never saw that. Largo's spirit rebelled against all that. So here he is now, married to Tanta, running a little shop in the South Farthing where he doesn't have any family and friends around, and also where the mindset around him is more pragmatic than he's used to. He's missing his friends, he's missing his family, he's missing the fun times he had, and he's missing the times of relaxation that he's used to, the times when he could disappear out into a field and spend all evening painting the sunset, or whatever it was that he did. He's missing that kind of life. He's stuck in a shop, he's sweeping, he's cleaning, he's counting money, he's writing figures up in little books, he's maintaining schedules for stock coming in and stock going out, and none of it is as exciting as it looked on the surface. I think this life soured for Largo within 3 or 4 years. And when Largo stopped trying, which I imagine he did, I imagine things started to slip through his fingers. He wasn't paying enough attention to what he was doing. He may have been giving things away to poor people instead of insisting on money. He may have been leaving the lids off jars of products that will dry out. And all of this would have created an extra workload to Tanta, who knew the importance of keeping everything running perfectly, day after day without fail. So I'm imagining that as the years pass, as you get into like 1270, there were tensions emerging between them. What I imagined happened was those tensions came to a head maybe when Fosco was about 5 years old. By this time, Tanta has realised it's not working out in the South Farthing. He's not settled down into the shop. And so the family pack up the shop, took their savings and their belongings and moved back to the East Farthing to set up a little shop there where commercial enterprises were really thin on the ground. My guess is that they moved to Whitfarrow because that places Fosco in the right place to meet all the people that he needs to meet down the track. That also places them in an area that Largo knows quite well, where people know him and he's got support if he needs it. This is where I think Fosco grew up. They've got a shop. I don't think their shop was ever a major success. Largo had dreams of becoming a large-scale merchant like the Hornblowers. He never achieved that. We'd know about it if he had. They probably made ends meet in their little shop, but it's possible they were assisted by Largo's siblings and by Marmaduke and Otto and Edelgar. I don't really have much more to say about Largo. Once he's back in the East Farthing, in Whitfarrow, where I'm placing him, all of those original 7 hobbits are married and have their families. There is one final event to close this video out, and that is the death of Bilbo Baggins. The trees don't actually give him a death year, but Tolkien has told us that Bilbo's descendants come from a long-lived line. So I've placed him here in 1268, in his 101st year. This may not be correct. I'm pretty sure I've pegged the correct decade. I'm pretty sure he passed away in the 1260s. But whether it was as early as 1264 or as late as 1269, I'm not really sure. Him being the anchor point for this entire series so far, it feels like moving into a new era to go on without him. It feels like we're moving towards the Shire modern world. The main point going forward is that with Bilbo's death, Mungo Baggins is now the unequivocal head of the family, and responsibility for the welfare of all of his extended family now lies on him. A task that I'm sure he is absolutely able to do. It's only been 10 years since I last talked about Sam's ancestors, and they really haven't moved. The only difference is Holman's youngest 2 children have now been born. Their names are Hending and Rose. They are all growing up in Hobbiton. By this time, Cottar's son Cotman has indeed been born, as has his younger son Carl. I actually read it as Cad for a very long time. It's Carl. The 2 children are Cotman and Carl. Now, given the brevity of this tree, I think it's entirely possible that Cotter does go on to have a whole bunch of other children. It's just that Tolkien didn't get around to coming up with who they were and what their names were. We've still got Hob Gamage growing up in probably the village of Tyfield. He's in his tweens, still a child, but probably starting to learn the trade that he's going to have later on in life. Hob becomes a roper. So at this point, chances are he's being apprenticed to somebody who makes ropes. He's beginning to learn a skill that's going to stay in the family for generations to come. I'll leave them at that. We'll have more to say about them later on. We can move on to the next generation.